Picture this. It is the year 401 BCE.
Oh man, a long time ago.
Right, and you are standing deep in this hostile, totally sun-baked territory of Mesopotamia. You're breathing in the literal dust of the ancient Near East.
Just completely out of your element.
Exactly. You are one of 10,000 heavily armed Greek hoplites, mercenaries. You've sold your sword for what you were, I'm absolutely assured, was just a routine local military action.
A quick in-and-out job.
Yeah, you were told you'd be home by harvest.
Yeah.
But the dust has literally just settled on the massive battle of Cunaxa near Babylon, and the terrifying, blood-chilling reality of your situation is really beginning to dawn on you.
The bottom is dropping out.
The bottom is totally dropping out.
Yeah.
The charismatic Persian prince who hired you, this visionary leader you banked your entire future on, has just been killed in combat.
Gone.
His body is just out there on the plains somewhere, and you are entirely surrounded by the vast, furious forces of the Persian Empire. You're stranded. And then, just when you think you've hit rock bottom, the absolute unthinkable happens. Your generals, the veteran men you instinctively look to for survival, they're invited to a peace conference by the enemy under a sacred flag of truce.
Which is supposed to be untouchable in the ancient world.
Right. But they are brutally, treacherously murdered, beheaded, gone.
Wow.
So you have no leaders, you have no supply lines, no maps. You are 1,500 miles from the agency, from your home, with the brutal Mesopotamian winter closing in, and you're surrounded by tribes who want nothing more than to just wipe you off the face of the earth.
It is, it's the absolute definition of a hopeless situation. When you strip away every normal support structure, like when you remove the constraints of civilization, the logistics of food and shelter, and the safety of the chain of command, what you are left with is a raw, unmitigated crisis.
Yeah.
Staring down a 1,500-mile march through blizzards, deserts, and hostile terrain just to survive. It's a scenario that forces human nature completely into the open.
Exactly. And the story of how those 10,000 Greeks fought their way out of that impossible situation, it's recorded in one of the most famous survival stories of the ancient world, Xenophon Anabasis.
A classic.
But today, we are not just doing a military history deep dive.
No, we're not.
We're not just mapping out troop movements or, discussing bronze weaponry. We are digging into a fascinating theological and psychological analysis of this text that we have in our source material today.
Right, because we were looking at Xenophon's character sketches, his profiles of these dead generals, of the Persian royals, and of himself.
And we're doing it through a very specific lens provided by the source, which is a conservative evangelical perspective.
Which is such a compelling framework, honestly. What this source is doing is treating the biblical text as the ultimate diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
It takes the timeless principles of Scripture, its unyielding standard of truth, its diagnosis of the human heart, and its definition of true leadership, and it lays them right over these ancient figures.
It's like an overlay.
Exactly. The ancient Greeks actually had a specific term for what Xenophon was doing with these character profiles. It's called ethopoeia.
Ethopoeia. Okay.
Yeah. It's the portrayal of a person's character, not through what they claim about themselves, but through their actions, their agonizing choices under pressure, and ultimately, their fates. Xenophon was basically writing a treatise on the soul of leadership.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission today for this deep dive is to take this ancient history and this theological framework from our source and hold them up as a mirror.
I love that. A mirror.
Right. So if you're listening to this right now, we are inviting you to step into the ancient dust of Babylon with us. Because the failures and triumphs of these ancient generals, they aren't just dead history.
Not at all.
They are a terrifyingly accurate reflection of the daily leadership struggles you face right now. We are talking about your home, your workplace, your church community, your friend group.
Yeah, the everyday stuff.
The ultimate goal here is to use these ancient lives to draw applications that, according to the source, deepen your love for Christ and equip you to live a more devoted life for Him with a character that actually endures when the pressure is really on.
To really grasp why these character studies are so incredibly potent, we have to understand the environment that produced them.
Okay, set the stage.
Well, the Anabasis functions as a moral anatomy laboratory. Xenophon, who actually wrote this account retrospectively in the 370s BCE, he was profoundly shaped by his time as a student of the great philosopher Socrates.
Oh, wow. I actually didn't realize he studied under Socrates.
Yeah, and the core of Socratic thought, the real heartbeat of his philosophy, is the belief that true virtue isn't theoretical. It is revealed strictly through conduct when a person is pushed to their absolute limits.
And a 1,500-mile fighting retreat through enemy territory is about as pushed to the limit as a human being can possibly get. I mean, just imagine the physical toll alone.
It's staggering.
Marching in heavy bronze armor, rationing water, fending off cavalry attacks in the rear, climbing freezing mountain passes.
But the physical toll is really just the baseline. The psychological toll is what actually cracks the foundation.
Right.
In an extreme survival situation like this, the superficial layers of a person are completely burned away. The polite fictions we tell ourselves in peacetime, they evaporate.
Yeah, they're gone.
A man cannot hide who he truly is when he is starving, freezing, and hunted day and night. His core motivations, whether that is greed, fear, pride, or genuine virtue, it's all going to bubble up to the surface.
It totally makes me think of those extreme survival reality shows on TV.
Oh, sure.
But obviously with actual terrifying life or death consequences. You know, it's like you can fake your resume in a corporate office job.
Yeah.
You can use all the right synergy buzzwords in a comfortable boardroom with the AC running and catered lunches. You can project a certain image of competence and stability. But you absolutely cannot fake your character when you are freezing in a mountain pass, you haven't eaten a real meal in a week, and the guy who signs your paychecks has literally just been decapitated.
Right. The stakes are just impossibly high.
Every single crack in your emotional and spiritual foundation is going to show.
I'd actually push that a step further based on the source text. It's not just that the cracks show, it's that the pressure actively widens them until the whole structure collapses.
Oh, wow.
That is the philosophical and theological argument being made here. We are placed in a laboratory where the hidden content of the human heart is forced into the open.
Yeah.
By showing what men did under pressure, and crucially, what their choices ultimately cost them or rewarded them with, we see the inescapable laws of moral cause and effect. So the stage is set. 10,000 Greeks stranded with the thin veneer of civilization entirely stripped away.
Which brings us to the man who struck the match. The man whose massive, world-altering ambition created this entire pressure cooker in the first place.
Cyrus the Younger.
Yes, Cyrus the Younger. Let's look at the traits of this Persian prince. Because Xenophon clearly admired him, right?
Very much so.
The text actually calls him the kingliest and most worthy to rule of all Persians since Cyrus the Great. And when you look at his resume, it's pretty easy to see why.
Cyrus was, by all accounts, an absolute prodigy. We're talking about a young man who embodied the pinnacle of Persian aristocratic virtue.
Okay, so what did that look like?
Well, from boyhood, he was a paragon of modesty among his peers. He was uniquely obedient to his elders, which in Persian culture was the total bedrock of societal stability.
Oh, interesting.
He was described as the aptest of learners in warfare, demonstrating extraordinary physical skill with the bow and the javelin. But it wasn't just physical prowess. As a ruler, as a satrap overseeing massive territories, he was remarkably effective.
He knew what he was doing.
He really did. He understood the mechanics of motivation. He rewarded the brave with governorships and wealth, ensuring loyalty. And his justice was swift and brutal.
Oh, brutal.
He punished wrongdoers so severely that he made his territory completely safe for the innocent to travel. And in the ancient world, safe roads were incredibly rare.
He also had this massive, almost legendary reputation for keeping his word, didn't he?
Yes.
The historical record emphasizes his unflinching fulfillment of treaties. If Cyrus shook your hand, the deal was done. He supposedly hated lying, which is what makes his story so incredibly fascinating and, frankly, so tragic, because his fatal flaw completely contradicts that sterling reputation.
And this is exactly where the theological evaluation in our source becomes incredibly sharp.
Right.
When we look at Cyrus's early track record through the lens of biblical wisdom literature, specifically the book of Proverbs, his commitment to justice actually aligns beautifully with biblical ideals of leadership.
Oh, really? Give me an example.
So Proverbs 29.14 says, "If a king judges the poor with fairness, his throne will be established forever." Proverbs 20.28 talks about a king upholding his throne through loyalty and truth. In this specific capacity, rewarding the good, punishing the bad, making the roads safe, Cyrus is functioning in a way that echoes biblical figures like Joseph in Egypt or Nehemiah in Jerusalem.
That makes sense.
He is exercising profound administrative integrity while holding immense political power. He is bringing order to chaos.
Right. He's building a society where people can actually flourish, But then, and this is a big but, we have to pivot to the fatal flaws.
The deception and the rebellion.
Because to achieve his ultimate goal, which wasn't just to be a great satrap, right? It was to overthrow his own brother, King Artaxerxes II, and seize the entire Persian throne. To do that, Cyrus completely abandons that foundational commitment to truth.
He does. He abandons it because his ambition outgrows his morality. He recruited these Greek mercenaries through calculated, deliberate deception.
Like a massive lie.
A huge lie. He knew that 10,000 Greeks wouldn't march deep into the heart of the Persian Empire to fight the King of Kings. So he told them they were going on a minor, local, punitive campaign against a group called the Pisidians.
Just a little border skirmish?
Exactly. He deliberately deceived the very men he needed most, manipulating their trust to serve his own grand vision.
And from a scriptural standpoint, according to the source material, that calculated deception shatters the entire moral framework he built. It violates the clear biblical command we see in places like Colossians 3.9 to not lie to one another.
Yes.
And the rebellion itself, raising an army to usurp his brother's legitimate throne, the source likens it to the ancient equivalent of Absalom's deceitful rebellion against King David in 2 Samuel.
That's a great parallel.
Absalom stood at the city gates, subtly stealing the hearts of the people, lying about his intentions, all to seize power. Cyrus is doing the exact same thing on a geopolitical scale.
Exactly. And look at how it culminates at the Battle of Cunaxa. This is the climax of his ambition. Cyrus is right on the precipice of total victory. His brilliant tactical planning is working perfectly.
The Greeks are winning, right?
The Greek mercenaries are absolutely crushing their side of the battle line. The throne is practically his. But then Cyrus sees his brother, Artaxerxes, across the battlefield.
Oh, boy.
And in that moment, all of his Socratic discipline, all of his Persian modesty, it completely vanishes. He loses his mind.
Wow.
He charges his brother in a fit of pure, ambitious rage. He actually manages to wound the king in the chest, but in his reckless, unshielded fury, he is immediately cut down and killed by the royal bodyguard.
Just like that.
The entire expedition, all the planning, all the deception, it collapses instantly because of one moment of lost self-control fueled by pride.
You know, here's where it gets really interesting to me. When I look at Cyrus, he doesn't just sound like an ancient prince. He sounds exactly like the ultimate modern Silicon Valley CEO.
Yeah, that's a fascinating comparison.
I mean, think about it. He's a young prodigy. He commands absolute cult-like loyalty from his team. He's incredibly generous with equity to his top performers, right? He believes in moving fast and breaking things.
Totally.
And yeah, he used some calculated deception to get his startup off the ground. He told his investors and his board one thing while secretly building a completely different product in the background. In our modern corporate culture, isn't that just considered the cost of doing business when you're trying to achieve a massive disruptive vision?
It really is often framed that way.
We tend to completely excuse the ambition, the arrogance, and the bending of the truth if the person is brilliant enough and the stock price is going up.
That is such a crucial modern parallel, and it's precisely why applying a biblical diagnostic to Cyrus, like the source does, is so disruptive to our modern sensibilities.
Yeah.
We idolize the charismatic visionary, but if we evaluate Cyrus through the lens of spiritual truth, he is the perfect, tragic example of partial virtue operating without any covenant fear of God, as the text puts it.
Okay, unpack that. Partial virtue.
He had brilliance, he had courage, he even had an administrative sense of justice. But brilliance without self-mastery, ambition without submission to a higher moral authority, it ultimately destroys far more than it builds.
It's like earthly excellence collapsing under the weight of its own idolatry.
I think that's the perfect way to phrase it. Leadership that flows merely from pragmatism or a desire for self-actualization or worldly ambition will always eventually hit a wall. It cannot break through.
Yeah.
Cyrus's virtues were undeniably real. He wasn't a fake talent. But because his foundational motive was pride, because his core driver was his own glory and a desire for absolute domination, it led directly to his destruction.
It's inevitable.
His death is the ultimate visceral proof of Proverbs 16.88, right? Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. It's a profound warning for anyone listening. You can have all the raw talent, the charismatic appeal, and the partial virtue in the world, but if your core driver is the exaltation of yourself, you are building a towering skyscraper on a foundation of sand.
And when the storm comes, the collapse will be absolute.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Cyrus fails because of this outsized pride, his grand ambition, and his willingness to deceive to get his way. He was a visionary who burned too hot.
Yeah.
But what happens when you strip away the charm, the generosity, and the grand vision of Osiris, and you are left with a leader who relies entirely on blunt force?
That is a dark pivot.
It is. And that brings us to one of his top Greek generals, a man named Clearchus. And the portrait painted of this guy in the source material is, frankly, terrifying.
Clearchus is categorized fundamentally as the martial tyrant.
The martial tyrant.
To understand him, you have to understand his background. He was a Spartan exile. He was raised in the Agoge.
The Spartan training system, right?
Yes, the brutal educational system that prized physical toughness, unquestioning obedience, and violence above all other human traits.
Wow.
Xenophon describes him as a thorough soldier who didn't just fight out of duty, but who loved war for its own sake. The text uses this incredible phrasing. It says he squandered his money on soldiering the way another man might squander it on a mistress.
That is such a wild, disturbing image.
It really is.
He loved the chaos, the adrenaline, and the violence of war more than wealth, comfort, or human connection. Like it was his deepest pathology. And his physical description matches that internal violence perfectly.
Oh yeah, he looked the part.
Xenophon notes that he had a permanent, scowling expression and a harshly grating voice. He was built to intimidate. But his core leadership philosophy is what we really need to dissect here. Because Clearchus operated on one singular maxim. He believed that a soldier must fear his commander more than he fears the enemy.
Right.
He ruled his men entirely through terror.
Let's look at how that actually played out historically. When the Greek mercenaries finally realized they had been lied to by Cyrus, when they figured out they were marching against the king of Persia, they naturally mutinied.
Of course they did.
They refused to march. Now, how does Clearchus handle this? He doesn't appeal to their better nature. He doesn't cast a new vision. He initially tries to force them forward, using physical violence, literally whipping his own men.
Oh, my word.
When that sparks a near riot, he pivots to this bizarre, manipulative form of rhetorical weeping. He stands in front of them, crying, essentially using emotional manipulation and veiled threats to force them back into line.
Wow, so toxic.
And the tragic irony is that in the pinch of danger, this actually worked. When the swords were clashing, when the enemy cavalry was bearing down, the troops relied on him. They huddled around his absolute certainty.
Because they needed a strong man.
Exactly. But Xenophon makes a crucial observation. The moment the crisis passed, the moment the immediate danger subsided, Clearchus' authority completely vanished.
Because nobody actually wanted to follow him.
Right.
There's no loyalty, no affection, no shared vision. They just didn't want him to execute them. They followed him the way a hostage follows a kidnapper with a gun. And the biblical critique of this leadership style from our source is absolutely devastating.
It dismantles him completely. If you hold Clearchus up against the servant leadership model outlined by the Apostle Peter, the contrast is absolute. 1 Peter 5.2-3 explicitly commands leaders to shepherd the flock of God, not under compulsion, but willingly. Not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock.
And Clearchus is just domineering 247.
He is the antithesis of this. Theologically, the source compares him to Abimelech from the Book of Judges.
Okay, remind me about Abimelech.
Abimelech was a brutal, tyrannical leader who seized power through mass murder. His reign was momentarily effective through sheer violence, but it was completely hollow, and it ultimately imploded, leading to a humiliating death.
There's also a profound lack of grace in Clearchus. If we think about Ephesians 4.29, which commands us to let no corrupting talk come out of our mouths, but only such as is good for building up, Clearchus only tore down. He had no capacity for biblical hesed. And that Hebrew word is so rich, you know. It means covenant love, steadfast loyalty, loving kindness. Clearchus had zero hesed for his people. And because of that, his authority evaporated because it had no foundation in genuine relationship.
And that lack of relational foundation is exactly what killed him in the end.
How so?
Well, the tragic irony of Clearchus is that because he ruled by fear and trusted no one, he lacked true discernment. He believed he could just outmuscle any situation.
Right.
This arrogance, this belief that fear could control everything, led him to walk blindly into the Persian satrap Tissaphernes' trap. He went to that peace conference believing his fearsome reputation alone would protect him. He was dead wrong. He was seized and beheaded.
Live by the sword, die by the sword. It's the ultimate dead end of tyrannical leadership. But it's crucial we don't just stop there, because Xenophon immediately pivots to give us the exact opposite of Clearchus.
Yes, the pendulum swings.
If Clearchus was the martial tyrant who ruled by fear, we now meet a general named Proxenus, and he represents the naive idealist.
Proxenus is such an important figure for us to analyze because, unlike Clearchus, he is dangerously relatable to well-meaning people today.
That's scary.
Proxenus wasn't a brute. He was a highly educated, refined man. He was a student of Gorgias, one of the most famous sophists and rhetoricians in the ancient world.
Okay, so he's an intellectual.
He joined Cyrus's expedition, not out of bloodlust like Clearchus, but hoping to achieve a great name, wealth, and status. Xenophon notes that Proxenus had the art of leading gentlemen. He was gentle, he was decent, he consistently praised virtuous behavior and encouraged his men to be good. But, and this is the massive fatal flaw, he could not command rough, battle-hardened soldiers.
Wow.
He completely lacked the capacity to inspire either deep respect or necessary fear.
So he was basically a nice guy who was completely out of his depth.
Completely out of his depth. Proxenus operated under the delusion that simply praising good behavior and being a decent, well-spoken guy was sufficient to lead a mercenary army. He often acted as a mediator, trying to politely break up violent disputes between different factions of troops.
But I'm guessing they just ignored him.
He had no teeth. He couldn't enforce his mediation. This left him and the men under him completely vulnerable to the machinations of the base, ruthless people around him. His desire to be liked completely eclipsed his duty to lead.
Wow.
And just like Clearchus, his lack of true discernment led him right into the Persian trap, where he was executed at the tragically young age of 30.
Let's bring this right into our daily lives, because if you're listening, I bet you see these two archetypes everywhere. Clearchus is the classic toxic manager.
Oh, absolutely.
He's the guy who steps in during the Q4 crunch when the company is missing its targets. When the pressure is on, he whips everyone into shape, he yells, he threatens, he micromanages, and magically the numbers look great for the quarter.
And the board loves him.
The board praises him. But his whole team quits in January because they are completely burned out, their mental health is destroyed, and they hate his guts.
That is a flawless modern parallel. He achieves short-term compliance at the cost of long-term culture.
Exactly. And Proxenus is the well-meaning youth pastor or, the overly accommodating HR director. He desperately wants to be everyone's friend.
A nice guy.
He's incredibly nice. He praises all the kids. He brings donuts to the meeting. But he completely lacks the backbone to stop a fight in the church parking lot or fire a truly toxic employee. He gets run over by anyone with a stronger will.
It's true.
So if we are looking at these two extremes, the tyrant who breaks people and the naive idealist who can't protect people, I have to ask a hard question here. Is the text suggesting that between the two, Clearchus is actually slightly better?
That's a provocative question.
I mean, playing devil's advocate here. In a literal life-or-death survival situation, Clearchus's brutal discipline at least kept people alive and in formation for a while, whereas Proxenus's niceness seems entirely useless in a crisis. Doesn't the real world sometimes require a Clearchus?
It's a very common assumption, and it's a tension we have to wrestle with. But the theological analysis we were applying here gives a definitive, resounding no.
Okay, tell me why.
Neither model is acceptable, and neither model is ultimately effective. We have to look at the deeper spiritual reality. If we connect this to the bigger picture, both of these men represent catastrophic failures of the human heart, just expressing themselves in opposite directions.
Right.
Clearchus hollows out genuine relationship. His feared tactics might produce that short-term Q4 compliance, but they destroy the soul of the community. A community built on fear is always one crisis away from mutiny.
Because fear breeds resentment, and resentment breeds betrayal.
Precisely. And while Proxenus seems better on the surface, his gentleness might even superficially resemble the fruit of the Spirit listed in Galatians 5. His naivety is a profound failure of biblical discernment.
Ah, I see.
We have to remember Jesus' command in Matthew 10:16. He didn't just say, "Be innocent as doves." He prefaced it with, "Be wise as serpents." It is not enough for a leader to just be innocent or nice. If you lack the strength, the wisdom, and the courage to protect your flock from wolves, your gentleness is actually a liability.
Wow.
It's a form of cowardice masquerading as kindness.
That's a gut punch. Cowardice masquerading as kindness.
It really is. Thematically, the source compares Proxenus to the foolish young king Rehoboam in 1 Kings 12.
Oh, Solomon's son.
Right, Rehoboam inherited the kingdom from Solomon, but he lacked the wisdom to navigate the tensions of his people. He listened to poor advice, he couldn't balance strength and accommodation, and he literally lost half his kingdom. Both Clearchus and Proxenus failed because they could not balance truth and grace, power and love. They are fragmented leaders.
So we've seen Cyrus fail through arrogant pride, Clearchus fail through brutal fear, and Proxenus fail through weak naivety. They all have fatal flaws, but they at least had some redeeming qualities or, understandable motivations.
Sure.
But Xenophon saves his darkest, most vitriolic ink for a man who seems to embody pure, unadulterated moral rot.
He really does.
This brings us to Menon the Thessalian, and the broader theme of absolute treachery involving the Persian figures Tissaphernes and Arius. Let's start with Menon, because this guy's a piece of work.
Menon is presented as a terrifying study in pure moral corruption. If the others had cracks in their foundation, Menon's entire foundation was rotten.
Just completely gone.
His defining, inescapable character trait was an insatiable desire for wealth and power. That was his only true north. And he didn't just stumble into corruption, he philosophically embraced it.
He leaned it.
Xenophon tells us that Menon actually regarded honesty as a weakness. He viewed truth-telling as folly. He prided himself on his capacity for fraud, perjury, and deceit, and he openly mocked those who tried to live decent, honorable lives.
He sounds like a clinical sociopath. I mean, the text notes how he managed his troops, and it's disgusting. He secured his soldiers' obedience not by being a strong leader, but by becoming an active accomplice in their misdeeds.
Yeah, joining them in the dirt.
Right. Instead of punishing bad behavior to create a safe society like Cyrus did, Menon basically said, hey, let's all go commit crimes, pillage, and abuse people together, and that way you owe me. We are bound by shared guilt.
It's twisted.
And politically, he was a massive, shameless sycophant. He famously crossed the Euphrates River early, breaking ranks with the rest of the Greek army, just to put on a grand show of eagerness to win special favor and financial rewards from Cyrus.
Xenophon treats Menon with barely concealed contempt. And historically, his fate is uniquely horrific, which is highly significant to the moral argument being made in the source.
What happens to him?
When the other generals, like Clearchus and Proxenus, were captured by the Persians, they were relatively quickly beheaded. It was a soldier's death, albeit by treachery, but Menon was kept alive. He was subjected to severe torture for an entire year before dying what Xenophon grimly calls the death of a felon.
And we can't talk about treachery without bringing in the Persian figures who orchestrated all this.
Right, Tissaphernes.
Tissaphernes, the Persian satrap, is the one who invited the Greek generals to the peace conference under a sacred flag of truce, swore oaths of safety, and then murdered them in cold blood. Xenophon calls him most impious and villainous, specifically noting that he showed absolutely no reverence for Zeus, who was considered the god of strangers and hospitality.
The ultimate betrayal in that culture.
And then there's Arius. Arius had been Cyrus's second in command. He was friends with the Greeks. But the moment Cyrus died, Arius shamelessly betrayed his former friends and allies to join Tissaphernes and save his own skin.
The biblical critique of these figures from the document is uncompromising. They represent the absolute bottom of the moral barrel. Menon is the perfect, terrifying illustration of 1 Timothy 6.0, the warning that the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils.
Wow.
He also embodies Proverbs 28.20, which warns that a faithful man will abound with blessings, but whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. Theologically, the source directly compares Menon to Judas Iscariot, who sold out the Son of God for 30 pieces of silver, and Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, who greedily chased after payment from Naaman the leper and was struck with leprosy himself.
That's a heavy comparison.
It is. And Tissaphernes and Arius are evaluated against the devastating list in Proverbs 6, which outlines the things the Lord actively hates: a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, and a false witness who breathes out lies. Treachery is not just bad strategy, it is abhorrent to the very nature of God.
Now, I want to push back on this a little bit because I think a lot of listeners might be having this exact thought. When we look at the historical account, Menon actually got ahead initially by being ruthless.
He did.
He crossed the river first, he got Cyrus's favor, he got his men to follow him by indulging their worst instincts. In the real world, the Menons often win, don't they?
That's the perception.
The corporate ladder is full of people who view honesty as weakness and fraud as strength. Wall Street has plenty of Menons. Politics is full of Menons. So why does Xenophon, and more importantly, why does this biblical framework insist that corruption is ultimately self-defeating? From a pragmatic standpoint, it seems like Machiavellian ruthlessness works pretty well right up until it doesn't.
That is an excellent pushback, and it forces us to deal with the reality of a fallen world. Yes, Machiavellian tactics often yield short-term dividends. You can absolutely cheat your way to a promotion. You
Yeah.
can lie your way into a lucrative contract. You can manipulate people to gain power. But we have to look deeper into the concept of moral causality emphasized in the source.
Moral causality.
The Apostle Paul lays this out perfectly in Galatians 6:7-8. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. The biblical argument is that fraud, selfishness, and treachery always produce self-destruction eventually because they put you at odds with the fundamental moral architecture of the universe.
The bill always comes due. You can delay it, but you can't dodge it.
Precisely. And this is why Menon's fate is so heavily emphasized. The Anabasis presents Menon's year of torture not just as a piece of bad luck or a cruel twist of fate, but as the visible, inevitable consequence of a life built entirely on deceit.
It catches up with him.
Think about the psychology of it. If you build an organization or a career or a life on the premise that everyone is expendable, that loyalty is a joke, and that truth doesn't matter, you will systematically alienate anyone with actual integrity.
That's a great point.
You will eventually find yourself surrounded entirely by other Menon's people who view you as expendable and who will lie to you the moment it benefits them. Xenophon and the biblical authors are making the same profound argument. The universe is structured by a righteous God in such a way that pure corruption eventually rots its own foundations and collapses in on itself.
Okay, so this brings us to a massive pivot point in the story. We are standing in the desert, the leaders are dead. If Cyrus was too proud to live, Clearchus too brutal to trust, Proxenus too weak to protect, and Menon too corrupt to survive, who is left to lead this stranded, terrified army of 10,000 men?
Right. Who steps up?
This brings us to Xenophon himself. And from a literary perspective, it's fascinating because he is writing this account years later, and he writes about himself in the third person, describing how he stepped up into the vacuum after the generals were murdered.
It is a remarkable, defining moment of leadership. The army is paralyzed by despair, and Xenophon steps forward and presents himself as the model of transparent, pious, and disciplined leadership.
He takes the reins.
He is essentially the Socratic ideal brought to life in a crucible of military crisis. He doesn't rely on fear like Clearchus. He doesn't rely on empty platitudes like Proxenus. He uses his rhetorical skill and deep psychological mastery to rebuild their morale.
How does he do that?
He reminds them of their dignity as free Greeks. He points out clear, logical, tactical advantages. But most importantly, he leads by absolute, unimpeachable, personal moral example.
And there are two specific, powerful actions that this theological analysis highlights to define Xenophon's leadership. First, let's talk about the situation at Byzantium.
Yes.
The Greek army has fought and bled for months. They finally reached the Greek city of Byzantium. They have overwhelming military power. They could easily have sacked the city.
Just taken
They
everything.
could have taken all the wealth, plundered the homes, and made themselves incredibly rich after years of unimaginable suffering. But Xenophon absolutely refuses to let them do it. He stands in the breach. He chooses moral principle and the long-term reputation of the Greeks over immediate financial gain.
Which, if you think about it, is the exact opposite of Menon. Menon would have led the charge to loot the city. Xenophon restrains them through moral authority.
Right. And the second action is even more visceral, and it happens during the darkest part of the retreat. They are marching through the mountains of Armenia. It is the dead of winter. There is a brutal, freezing blizzard.
Just terrible conditions.
The men are physically broken. They are literally giving up, sitting down in the snow, waiting to freeze to death. And Xenophon, the supreme commander of the army, doesn't ride up on a horse and yell at them like Clearchus would. He doesn't just pat them on the back and say, hang in there, like Proxenus might.
No.
Xenophon takes off his own heavy commander's cloak, grabs an axe, and starts chopping firewood himself in the freezing cold. He deliberately strips himself of his privilege and shares their agonizing toil. He shames them back into action, not by scolding them, but by taking on the lowest, hardest physical work himself.
And this is where the conservative evangelical critique finds its strongest point of alignment with Xenophon. The theological analysis argues that Xenophon is the closest pagan equivalent to a biblical servant leader that we find in classical literature.
That's a high compliment.
It is. His shared toil in that freezing blizzard deeply echoes the leadership of Nehemiah. When Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, He didn't just sit in a governor's tent issuing orders. He and his servants worked on the wall with weapons in their hands, sharing the danger and the sweat with the common people.
Right, he was in the dirt with them.
And Xenophon's integrity in refusing to plunder Byzantium perfectly mirrors the Apostle Paul's integrity in 2 Corinthians, where Paul absolutely refuses to use his apostolic authority to be a financial burden on the churches he serves.
The analysis even goes so far as to say that Xenophon splitting wood in the snow faintly but truly mirrors Christ washing the disciples' feet in the Gospel of John. He uses his supreme authority to serve and to save, not to extract and exploit.
Precisely. Xenophon demonstrates the profound truth that durable, life-saving authority is grounded in character. It is grounded in a willingness to suffer alongside your people rather than relying on raw power or emotional manipulation. And we have to acknowledge the pragmatic result.
It worked.
It worked. Through this kind of moral leadership, he successfully held the army together and led the 10,000 home across 1,500 miles of hostile territory.
So we have to pause here and ask, what does this all mean for you, the listener? As I read this analysis, Xenophon seems like the perfect Christian leader, except for one massive detail. He isn't a Christian.
Right, he's a pagan Greek.
He's writing almost 400 years before the incarnation of Christ. He's relying entirely on his Socratic philosophical training and Greek concepts of virtue. It feels like he built this incredibly beautiful, functional house, but without a theological foundation.
If I can play devil's advocate here, if Xenophon can achieve this level of servant leadership just through philosophy and discipline, can human effort alone really sustain this kind of character? Do we actually need the gospel to be good leaders?
That tension is exactly what makes this deep dive so important. The analysis doesn't shy away from that question. It acknowledges Xenophon's profound success, but it interprets his virtue through the crucial theological lens of general revelation. General revelation, meaning truths about God, morality, and justice that are evident in nature and woven into the human conscience. Right. This is Romans 1 and Romans 2 territory.
Exactly. The theological argument is that virtues like justice, truth-telling, self-sacrifice, and servant leadership aren't arbitrary human inventions. They actually reflect the moral character of God himself.
Oh, that makes total sense.
So when Xenophon practices these virtues, even as a pagan philosopher operating outside of the biblical covenant, he is aligning himself with the moral grain of the universe. He is acting in accordance with how God designed humanity to function, and therefore he finds success. God honors truth and justice, even when practiced by a Greek general.
But there's a limit, right?
Exactly, and this is the vital pivot. The analysis is very careful to note the limitations. Xenophon's virtue lacks an ultimate saving allegiance to the Creator. Xenophon can diagnose the needs of the human heart perfectly. He knows that greed, fear, and pride will destroy a leader and an army, but Socratic philosophy cannot provide the eternal cure for those diseases.
It falls short.
Philosophy can offer rigorous discipline, it can offer behavior modification, but it cannot offer redemption or a new heart.
Which brings us directly to the practical application. How should you, the listener, be reading this ancient text today? How does this impact your Tuesday morning commute or your next staff meeting? We are looking at the ultimate diagnostic tool. How do we use the Anabasis not just as history, but as a spiritual discipline?
The analysis points back to the early church fathers, specifically brilliant minds like Basil of Caesarea. Basil argued that reading classical pagan texts like this can actually train our moral imagination.
Train our imagination.
He compared it to a bee gathering nectar from flowers. By seeing these virtues and vices played out in such extreme life or death stakes, it prepares our minds to receive scriptural truth more fully. It takes the abstract, sometimes familiar commands of the Bible and makes them suddenly very concrete, very bloody, and very real.
It's the ultimate high-stakes stress test for Proverbs 4.23. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. The Anabasis is showing us, in terrifying high definition, exactly what flows out of a heart that isn't guarded.
And this is where the mirror is turned directly on the reader. The analysis challenges you to use Xenophon's portraits to interrogate your own life. You have to ask yourself hard questions. Where are you relying on Clearchus's fear tactics in your own home?
Wow.
Are you creating an environment where your spouse or your children only comply with your wishes because they are afraid of your anger, your silent treatment, or your grating voice?
That hits incredibly close to home. It strips away all the excuses we make for our own bad behavior. Or what about work? Where are you using Cyrus's justifiable deception at the office?
Oh, that's a big one.
Are you telling yourself that because your ultimate vision for the company or the project is good, it's perfectly fine to lie to your team, mislead your clients, or fudge the numbers to get them on board?
Or where are you suffering from Proxenus's cowardly gentleness in your church community or your friend group? Are you so desperate to be liked, so desperate to maintain a veneer of decency that you refuse to confront actual sin, toxicity, or dysfunction? Are you letting the wolves devour the sheep because you are too nice to lock the gate and fight back?
I think the most convicting part of this entire deep dive is realizing that these aren't just exotic, ancient failures of guys wearing tunics and bronze armor. As the theological framework powerfully states, these are the default failure modes of every single human heart that hasn't been remade by grace.
Yes.
If we are left entirely to our own devices, we all default to pride, fear, naivety, or greed, depending on our personality and our circumstances. We are all, on some level, acting like a Cyrus, a Clearchus, a Proxenus, or a Menon.
And that profound realization leads us to the final, most crucial point of the entire analysis. Xenophon is a master diagnostician. He can show us the disease in our hearts with terrifying clinical precision. He can even show us what a healthy leader looks like through his own example. But Xenophon cannot heal us.
No, he can't.
We have to look elsewhere for the medicine.
Right, because if Xenophon's intense discipline and Socratic philosophy aren't enough to permanently change human nature, what is? We have to look at the cure Xenophon couldn't prescribe.
Exactly.
The deepest lesson of this entire historical epic seems to be about the absolute limits of human effort and pedigree. Proxenus had the best rhetorical education money could buy, studying under Gordius, and it didn't give him a backbone when he needed it most. Cyrus had the best royal birth, the best military training, and the most refined cultural upbringing imaginable. And none of it cured his arrogant, self-destructive pride.
And none of it.
Character, ultimately, isn't just a product of education, good breeding, or sheer willpower.
The Christian reader, guided by this biblical framework, knows the cure that Xenophon couldn't see. Jesus completely upends and redefines the entire concept of power and leadership in Mark 10:42-45.
Oh, I love that passage.
He tells his disciples, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them," which is the exact definition of Clearchus and Cyrus, "and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many."
A ransom for many. That phrase is the entire difference right there. Xenophon suffered alongside his men. He was noble. He split the wood in the freezing snow, but he didn't die for them.
Right.
He couldn't pay the moral debt of their failures.
And the analysis draws a breathtaking contrast here using Philippians 2.5 devices. That passage describes the kenosis, Christ emptying himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross.
Wow.
The document insists we understand that Christ emptying himself is in a completely different transcendent category than Xenophon taking off his cloak to split wood. Xenophon did it as a brilliant, necessary psychological technique to motivate his men to survive a winter.
Right, it was a tactic.
Christ did it as divine love descending to redeem a broken, mutinous humanity. Xenophon was showing them how to survive the elements. Christ was bearing the wrath of God to secure their eternal life.
So if I'm listening to this right now, and I've looked deeply into the mirror of the Anabasis, and I realize with a sinking feeling, oh man, I am totally acting like Clearchus at home, or I am absolutely acting like Menon at work. The takeaway here isn't just a self-improvement program, right?
No, absolutely.
The answer isn't just try harder not to be greedy or try harder to be nice. If I'm acting like Menon, the cure is union with Christ. The theology here is saying that Christ's death absorbed the penalty for my greed and my pride. And his resurrection gives me a completely new living heart to operate from.
Exactly. The gospel is not behavior modification. It is resurrection. How do we actually change? How do we stop being these broken archetypes? The answer is the active presence of the Holy Spirit. The analysis points beautifully to Galatians 5:22-23, the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. When you read that list, it is fascinating, almost haunting, to realize that it contains exactly the virtues that these generals lacked, point by point.
Oh, that's such a good connection.
Clearchus lacks gentleness, peace, and love. Cyrus lacked self-control and faithfulness. Menon completely lacked goodness and kindness. Proxenus had a superficial gentleness, but he entirely lacked the grounding of true faithfulness and self-control.
It's the perfect antidote. The gospel joins you to the one who genuinely renews character from the inside out.
Yeah.
Christ didn't just come to be a better Socratic philosopher. He didn't just come to give us a brilliant moral diagnosis and tell us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps.
Right.
He came to bear our failures, our pride, our fear, our cowardice on the cross, and to give us his own spirit so we can actually lead, love, and live differently.
That is the ultimate soaring thesis of this entire exploration. The Anabasis, as a brilliant piece of historical literature, shows us exactly what human nature does when the pressure is on and the safety nets are gone. Scripture shows us what God's nature does to redeem it.
What an incredible, sweeping journey this has been. From the blood-soaked, dusty sands of Canaxa, where a prince's pride cost him an empire and his life, to the freezing, snowy mountains of the Armenian retreat, where a philosopher had to split wood to keep his men from giving up and dying.
A wild ride.
We've unpacked, layer by layer, how pride, fear, naivety, and greed inevitably, systematically destroy leadership. We've seen how partial virtue might win a battle but will always lose the war. And most importantly, we've seen how, through the lens of this profound theological analysis, only Christ provides both the ultimate model of servant leadership and the actual supernatural means to achieve it in our own lives.
It is a profound historical and spiritual mirror, and I think it leaves every single one of you listening with a necessary, unavoidable challenge.
Let's hear it.
If a pagan philosopher like Xenophon, armed with nothing but human reason, Socratic training, and sharp observation, could deduce that the condition of the heart is the absolute center of leadership just by watching men try to survive a desert, what excuse do we have?
Wow.
We are equipped with the indwelling Holy Spirit. We have the completed very Word of God in our hands. What possible excuse do we have if we continue to lead our homes, our workplaces, and our churches using the manipulative, fear-based tactics of a Clearchus, the cowardly silence of a Proxenus, or the calculated, ambitious deceptions of a Cyrus?
That is a thought that is going to stick with me long after we wrap up today. We have the ultimate blueprint, and we have the spirit to build it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Anabasis, the anatomy of the soul, and the call to true Christian leadership. We hope this look into the ancient dust of Babylon has encouraged you, challenged you, and equipped you to step out today and live devotedly, not relying on your own strength, your own cleverness, or your own philosophy, but entirely on the finished redemptive work of Christ. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and above all else, keep guarding your heart.